The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. When Jesus had crossed in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered round him, and he stayed by the lakeside. Then one of the synagogue officials came up, Jairus by name, and seeing him, fell at his feet and pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is desperately sick. Do come and lay your hands on her, to make her better and save her life." Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed him. They were praising all around him. Now there was a woman who had suffered from hemorrhage for 12 years. After long and painful treatment under various doctors, she had spent all that she had without being any better for it. In fact, she was getting worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him through the crowds and touched his cloak. "If I can touch even his clothes," she had told herself, "I shall be well again." And the source of the bleeding dried up instantly, and she felt in herself that she was cured of her complaint. Immediately aware that power had gone out from him, Jesus turns around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples said to him, "You see how the crowd is praising round you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" But he continued to look all round to see who had done it. Then the woman came forward, frightened and trembling because she knew what had happened to her. And she fell at his feet and told him the whole truth. "My daughter," she said, "your faith has restored you to health. Go in peace and be freed from your complaint." While he was still speaking, some people arrived from the house of the synagogue official to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why put the master to any further trouble?" But Jesus had overheard the remark of theirs, and he said to the official, "Do not be afraid, only have faith." And he allowed no one to go with him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. So they came to the official's house, and Jesus noticed all the commotion, with people weeping and wailing unrestrainedly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and crying? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. So he turns them all out, and taking with him the child's father and mother and his own companions, he went into the place where the child lay. And taking the child by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I tell you to get up." The little girl got up at once and began to walk around, for she was 12 years old. At this, they were overcome with astonishment, and he ordered them strictly not to let anyone know about it, and told them to give her something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to the Lord Jesus Christ.
So today in the Gospel we find a very interesting story. It's just one story actually. It's about the healing of the daughter of Jairus, the synagogue official. But in that story, there is an insertion of another story. So the Jairus comes to meet Jesus. And before Jesus goes to the house of Jairus, there is this lady who has been suffering from hemorrhage for 12 years. So there is an insertion of that story that cuts in between the whole story of Jairus. And there is a reason why this is there. It is because the story says the same thing. The journey of faith, how faith can bring healing to our bodies, how faith can bring healing to our souls. There are certain common things in this story. The first thing is that the woman has been suffering from hemorrhage for 12 years. 12 is, of course, we know, is a very symbolic number in the Bible. And it symbolizes completeness, that this lady had come to the completion of what she was going through. She had come to the peak, to a moment where she could say, there is no hope again, there is no way out. I have come to the fullness of my sickness. And this is compared to the 12 years old girl, 12 again, the 12 years old girl who had died. And secondly, there was a very big temptation to give up. For this lady was that she had visited all the doctors, she had visited all the places where she could visit, and the word of God says she was even getting worse. She had been treated in every way, but there was no way out. So it was a situation of hopelessness. It was a situation of despair. On the other hand, as Jesus finishes with this lady, somebody comes from the house of the synagogue official and then says, why put the master to the test? Your daughter is dead. So that is another temptation there. Your daughter is dead. There is no way out. She is dead. She's finished. It's completed in her life. Everything has come to a stop. So why put the master to the test? So that is another temptation. And there is a temptation to give up there. But the synagogue official Jairus does not give up. Thirdly, there is a sense of a touch. There is something about touch in this gospel, which is very pronounced. Like the Jairus comes to Jesus and says, come and lay your hands on my daughter. And even when Jesus goes to the house of Jairus, he holds the little girl by the hand. So that sense of touch. But also for the lady who had suffered from hemorrhage for 12 years, said, if only I could touch him, I will receive healing. So the sense of touch. And finally, faith is really pronounced in this gospel. The woman was moved by faith. Jesus says at the end, your faith has healed you. And Jesus talks to Jairus when somebody comes from the house and says, your sister is dead, your daughter is dead. Jesus tells Jairus, only have faith. So there are these 4 points that are very common in all these stories, but there is something about it. The first thing is that it's an impossible situation. For this lady who has been suffering for 12 years, she had lost hope. It had come to a point where there was no way out. Jairus, on the other hand, the daughter is dead. So when somebody is dead, it means it's finished. There is nothing that can be done about the situation again. But this lady said, if only I could touch, if only I could reach out and touch him, everything would be changed. And this is what faith can do. Faith can make impossible situations possible. The Gospel according to Matthew in chapter 17, verse 20 says, even if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, you can command this mountain and it will be transferred from here and be planted in the sea. And it says, for he who has faith, nothing is impossible. This lady sits, after everything has failed, she says, if only I could reach out and touch his cloak, everything is going to change. If only. And I know there are situations in life when we come through situations and we feel, the doctor's report has said, I am left with 12 months to live. I am left with 3 months to live. I'm left with 6 months to live. There is a temptation, and it is true we should believe the report of the doctor, but our faith should move us beyond that. And we say to ourselves, if only I could receive the Holy Eucharist today, things will change in my life. And that move of faith can really change our situations, because Jesus says it, For he who has faith, nothing is impossible. The Gospel according to Matthew again, chapter 19, verse 26, if I'm not mistaken, it says that for human beings it's impossible, but for God all things are possible. And things can be possible only through faith. Remember what he tells this woman in Mark's Gospel, chapter 5, verse 34 today. Your faith has healed you. It's not me who healed you, but your faith, your move of faith. When she said, I am going to reach out. And this is what Jesus needs of us. When we say, I am going to do it, I am going to try, I am going to reach out, and I'm going to take that move of faith and say, if only I could go for confession today, things will be different. If only I could sit before Jesus, if I could have an opportunity to sit before the Blessed Sacrament, things are going to be different. If only I could read something from His Word, things are going to be different. If only I could come in contact with Him, if I could receive Him, things will be different. And it is faith that can make us to move to that point where when everything has failed us, we can only rely on God. And it is faith which can change the situations of our life. So it doesn't matter how impossible it is. It doesn't matter how terminal our sicknesses have been. It doesn't matter how impossible it has become for us to get new jobs. It doesn't matter how impossible it has become for the situation where we find ourselves. Jesus calls us to take that move of faith like that lady. When everything had failed, when she received all the discouragement that she could receive in life, when Jairus was told that her daughter had died, he did not give up. And the lady as well, she did not give up. But she said, if only I could have contact with Him, everything is going to change in my life. Maybe we could take up this and say, if only I could do that. If only I could do that. If only I could have somebody to pray over me, things would change in my life. And that gift of faith can really change our lives, because for he who has faith, nothing is impossible.